Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. On the day farmers stage a Bharat Bandh, we asked, should the minimum support price be made legally binding? And secondly, should it be calculated in terms of comprehensive costs plus 50%? Those are two of the critical issues I shall raise today with one of India's most highly regarded agricultural experts, the Infosys Professor for Agriculture at ICRIER and the former chairman of the Commission for Agricultural Costs and Prices, Professor Ashok Gulati. Professor Gulati, I'm going to deliberately make my questions simple and straightforward so that people who find agriculture and agricultural economics forbidding and difficult to follow can easily grasp our conversation. And let me start with a few basic questions to set the scene, so to speak. Farmers are demanding the minimum support price for 23 crops be made legally binding. Let me start by asking, what percentage of total agricultural produce do these 23 crops represent?
Less than 28%, to be exact, 27.8%.
So it's literally around 25% or just above of total agricultural produce is represented by these 23 crops for which they want legal binding MSP.
Yeah, broadly you can say, 28% is the calculation, 27.8. So you can say less than 30%, that's easy to follow.
Now, with regard to these 23 crops, does the existing MSP regime cover the country as a whole, or is it mainly focused on the north and west, with large parts of East India excluded?
Well, we have to understand out of 23 crops, I would say 80-90% of the operation is only in two crops. That is wheat and rice. Sugarcane is a little different animal because that's not paid by the government MSP. It's a fair and remunerative price to be paid by the factories. So that's a little different. But amongst these other crops, primarily wheat and rice, and that too in 5-6 states, Punjab, Haryana, in a way top the list. Then Madhya Pradesh has built its system of procurement over the last 10 years during Shivraj Singh Chauhan's period for wheat, and Chhattisgarh built up the system for rice. So there were two new additions. And then there is Telangana that has emerged as a contributor to the central pool, and Andhra Pradesh had been earlier also. Then there are smaller pockets here and there, something coming from Orissa and marginal things coming from Rajasthan at times. So literally 6-7 states maximum are benefiting from that system.
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying literally 6-7 states are the beneficiaries of MSP. And although Chhattisgarh, Telangana, and Andhra are beginning to become part of the MSP regime, most of the rest of East India is excluded. Have I understood that correctly?
East India is more or less blank, all the way from eastern UP to Bihar to Jharkhand to West Bengal to Assam, all those are almost zero or very marginal. There's
Okay,
nothing.
now today's business standard in its leader, referring to research that you yourself have done in 2018, 2019, says that only 8.8% of agricultural households sold any crop under MSP in 2018-19. That's under 10%.
That's right. That's true. It is from the situation assessment survey of the 1819.
So MSP is therefore a marginal concern or not a major concern for the majority of farmers in India.
That's true, but this is 1819 data. And if you add, like last 3, 4, 5 years, and that's what I'm saying, some states have come up, Telangana a little bit better, something on Chhattisgarh. So you can say broadly 10% of the farmers are gaining from this.
10%. I just underline that for the audience. That is 1/10 of agricultural households actually sell crops under MSP.
MSP, that's right.
Now tell me, Professor Gulati, do high-flying sectors of Indian agriculture, like poultry, which is growing, I believe, at 8 and 9%, fisheries, which I'm told is growing at 7, 8%, and milk, which I'm told is growing at 5, 6%, do these high-flying sectors have access to an MSP regime, or are they growing without it?
Zero MSP. It's the beautiful part of the thing that poultry sector is totally driven by the private sector. It's vertical integration. There is a contract farming. And the big hatcheries give them the chicks and then also give the promise to take it buyback arrangement and they give them what the costs are. So that system has been working and it's a major transformation over the last 20, 30 years. And that's the fastest growing sector. Same thing in fishery and similar thing, although milk was driven by cooperatives, but after 2002-3, when Mr. Vajpayee totally delicensed the dairy sector, private sector has been growing in the dairy sector at twice the rate of cooperatives. So it's a double engine growth, but the model remains the same. There's no MSP. It's a mutual agreement between the sellers and the buyers.
I'll just underline that for the audience. Some of the fastest growing sectors of Indian agriculture, poultry, fisheries, and milk, do not have an MSP regime at all.
That's right.
Against this background, Professor Gulati, let's come to the demand being raised by Punjab farmers for a legally binding MSP for 23 crops. First of all, let me ask you a general question. How do you view their demand that MSP should be made legally binding?
On the face of it, creating a legal binding, to my understanding, it is going to be anti-farmer. Why? Because if the supply exceeds demand, nobody will be ready to touch, at a price, because there has to be an equilibrium price in the market of demand and supply. And normally MSP should be marginally below that, so that at the harvest time when everybody brings produce, the prices crash. So that is the time when government has to give support. But if you put an MSP above the equilibrium price, you will end up with surpluses that nobody wants to buy. Then it will stay with the farmer. And where will the farmer go and take it? Because anybody buying at a lower price can be hauled up and put behind the bars. So I feel I can understand the spirit of the demand for higher income, basically, but the instrument through which they are trying to demand, I think is misguided.
Is it also the case that if MSP becomes legally binding, then at harvest time, when prices fall perhaps below the MSP level, private traders simply will not buy?
That's
Because
exactly.
they will find that the market price is below MSP, and if they buy at the market price, they are acting illegally, therefore they will not buy at all. And this will mean that everything will have to be bought by the government.
How much government will buy and how many commodities will it buy? These 23, why not then for all other commodities of livestock sector and horticulture sector? Even horticulture doesn't receive any MSP, and that's 20% of the produce.
Can we estimate, Professor Gulati, the cost of making MSP for 23 crops legally binding, is it 10 lakh crore as the Times of India reported in an article yesterday?
I don't know how that is calculated by them, so I cannot endorse that 10 lakh or 11 lakh crores. But I was looking at the demands of the farmers, including this MSP, pension, loan waiver, and all that. On the MSP becoming legal, it depends upon how many commodities the government will have to buy and whether the market prices are 30% below that so-called MSP at a enhanced cost C2. So actually, the budget for this, the fiscal cost, uh, whether it will be 5 lakh crores or 10 lakh crores or 2 lakh crores, it depends upon how you operate this scheme. Because you will be selling it back in the market at what price it will be sold. We don't know. So a lot depends. But to me, operating and doing this for 23 crops is operationally impossible to implement.
Just to underline that once again for the audience, what you're saying is it's hard to estimate an overall cost for the making of MSP as a legally binding entity because it depends upon the price that's prevailing at the time, which could vary crop to crop. It could vary also area to area. It also
Right.
depends upon how much the government sells back and how much the government buys. And therefore, an overall estimate of 10 lakh crore could be accurate, but it could be just a guess.
That's right. I don't know how they have calculated, so I really can't comment on that.
Let's come to the second demand made by farmers connected to MSP. This time it's to do with the way MSP is calculated. Farmers want it in terms of the Swaminathan Commission's recommendation of what's called C2 plus 50, which is total comprehensive cost, including labor, including imputed rent for the land, plus 50% more. How do you view this demand?
This is like if I'm staying in my own house, then you impute the rental value of that and take that as a cost. Now, almost 70% of India's agriculture is owner operated, I would say. And that is going to increase the costs under which this MSP will be determined. My calculation from the cost of cultivation data is by 25 to 30% in almost all the crops, 23 crops that we are talking about. So if the prices go up in the economy for these crops at least 25 to 30%, it has large implications on the demand because the demand will shrink, right? At a higher price, the demand will shrink. There will be more surpluses. That means farmers are ready to produce, but there are no takers, and then the government will have to store those. It will have implications for the rest of the economy, what happens to the food inflation, and therefore the demand from all people to increase their DAs and whatnot, and so on and so forth. So it has very large implications, and I think this route of increasing the prices, and it will also have a major problem in terms of WTO, because the commitment that we have given there in terms of how much support we can give to wheat and rice and other crops is already touching the upper limit. And with this, immediately it will cross and we'll have troubles in the WTO negotiation. So I would say, as I said earlier, I understand the demand in terms of income augmentation, but the instrument through which they are asking by raising prices by almost 25 to 30% in one go seems undesirable. I don't think any government can perhaps agree to that, and it will create major distortions in the economy.
Let me pick up on two of those consequences that you spoke about because I think they would be germane to the audience who's listening to this interview. If calculating MSP in terms of C2 plus 50% means prices of those 23 commodities will increase by between 25 and 30%, that means the cost of food for you and me, for
Of
ordinary
course,
people, will go up by 25, 30%.
right? At
So
least
that's
for
an
those 23
enormous,
commodities.
that is an enormous push upwards for inflation.
Right, of course. Mhm.
Secondly, if MSP were to be calculated on the basis of C2 plus 50%, I imagine there would be a very sizable impact on the government's budget because the government already uses its money to provide free food for 800 million people. Now, that free food for 80 crore will cost the government 25-30% more.
Right. At present, this revised estimate is food subsidy 2,12,000 crores. This will simply go to 2,75,000 crores straight away.
Which
Just
means
on wheat and
government,
rice. Just on wheat and rice.
just
Think
on
about
wheat
it.
and rice, not the other 21 crops.
Okay, so if 21 crops, think of a budget of at least 4 or 5 lakh crores minimum.
This would have a huge impact, I
Yep,
presume, on the government's fiscal deficit.
of course. Don't forget about fiscal consolidation and bringing it down to 5.1%. It will go to 6.5%, 7%.
So, am I right in understanding that you are both against making MSP legally binding as well as increasing it in terms of its calculation to the C2 plus 50% calculation? You're against both.
Putting it against and in favor, I would give you better alternatives to achieve the same ends. So
I
my
understand.
feeling is that the instruments are not the ones which are economically rational way to go ahead. I understand their need and I have all the compassion for it because that's what my life has been, fighting for the betterment of farmers.
In
Now,
other words, you're saying, Professor Gulati, this is not the right way, it is not the optimal way of
yeah,
tackling the problems that farmers face. This way of tackling it would increase inflation for the entire country. It would increase the government's deficit. It would leave the government less room for other developmental needs, health and education, for example, that are as important to the country. There are better ways of doing it. This is not the right way.
that's right. Not just health and education, but they won't have any money left even for agriculture development.
Let's then come to other better ways of tackling the problems farmers face. Now, one of the key concerns farmers face is that they are vulnerable to the vagaries of the monsoon as well as
Yes.
the vagaries of the market. How do we protect them against this? Let me put forward the suggestions that some people have spoken about. You've spoken about it yourself as well. Do we need a price stabilization fund so that when prices fall below the MSP level, the difference is made up by the government?
This is one of the instruments which can be used, price stabilization fund. But even better than this is getting the markets right. What do I mean by that? Normally you look ahead before sowing, you should know what the price of your product is going to be after 4 months when the crop comes in the market. And the instrument for that is looking into the futures markets. That's in a developed world, whether it is US or China, they have developed their futures markets. We have literally, Vajpayee Saab took a big, bold decision of opening up futures markets in agriculture commodities. And from 2003 to 2011, they were going up. But when there was an inflationary pressure, the government started coming down heavily. And today they have almost killed the futures market. So we don't know what the price after 4 months would be. So the messenger on the prices, which could have guided you, you have already shot it down. Okay, so there is need to revisit and develop and look at China and US, how the future markets operate. So that's number one, which is market aligned and market oriented to give some coverage to the price risk that the farmers face. Today, our farmers are sowing crops by looking at yesterday's price, that is last year's. And if the last year prices are high, everybody moves into that direction and then the prices collapse. Okay, excess production. They are not looking into the forward what the price would be. So that is one instrument. But if in the current system, which is distorted markets, if the prices go down, then you can have a stabilization fund which can come into action. It's not new. Many countries have tried it, but that size of the stabilization funds keeps increasing. If you are not having a proper signal from the markets and not following that, then even this fund will keep on increasing and will cost heavy.
Let me put you another suggestion, which some may consider radical, but I think I've heard you write and speak about this as well. Is some form of income support preferable? I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the practice in China, where farmers are given income support and can spend the money as they want on seed, power, fertilizer, or whatever. Would that be an advisable route for us to follow in India?
Yes, I think, and China is a smallholder economy. Their holding size is smaller than ours. Their overall cultivated area is smaller than ours, but they produce more than double of ours. So that wonder, it's not a question of centrally controlled economy or this or that. They are more market economy today than we are. Okay, so from that angle, I think if we have to give a support, it should be productivity enhancing support. They call it input investment support. And that is the way, even in India, Raitu Bandhu was the beginning of that little story in Telangana before the last elections. And PM Kisan also came out of that. It can be fine-tuned, it can be enhanced. That is the least distorting to markets. And depending upon how much you can afford, you can give it.
Am I right in saying that income support would be preferable because it gives money to the farmers and gives the farmer the option to decide what he spends that money on, whether it's seed, fertilizer, power, or whatever, but it doesn't distort the price market for whatever he's producing. That is, the price is still set by the market. There's no distortion at that level, but the farmer gets the support he needs as an insurance against vagaries of the market or vagaries of the monsoon.
Yes, on this front, I think I can add a little bit more that you have, when you are giving this support, I would say the fertilizer subsidy as well as the power subsidy should be loaded on this income support, and even rationalization of food subsidy should be put here. You will have roughly 4 to 5 lakh crores to distribute. And that then you can give them a sort of a menu that these are the 5, 7 things on which you can spend, because some people fear if you give money to the people, to the farmers, oh, they will drink liquor and they will not invest in this and that. Even surveys have been done on that, 2-4%, there is this type of misuse. But broadly, you have to then free up the prices of fertilizers and power and bring it to the market prices. Punjab alone gives for power subsidy of 9,500 crores. And if you take the all India picture of power subsidy is 90,000 crores. You have a fertilizer subsidy of 1,88,000 crores. And then you have a food subsidy of 2,12,000 crores. And you are giving free rice to the producers of rice in Chhattisgarh or Bihar or anywhere else. By increasing the first you buy and then you give back to them same. This is totally irrational policy. I think we need to revisit these policies and rationalize these policies. And within a budget of 4 to 5 lakh crores, you can easily handle this situation and make it more productive, more vibrant, and more environmentally sustainable.
Now, Professor Gulati, a second problem is one that you wrote about in an article you did for the Times of India on the 14th, 2 days ago. You said, and I'm quoting you, the real problem of Indian farmers in general and Punjab farmers in particular is that their real incomes are increasing very modestly. How do we tackle this?
Real incomes last 20 years. So whichever the government, we have analyzed the Manmohan Singh government and the Modi government, the agriculture growth rate is 3.5%. So call it the Hindu rate of growth, more or less stable. Of course, there is volatility, But overall, for 20 years, the rate of growth of Indian agriculture is 3.5%. And that's broadly through which they get their incomes. We have analyzed the situation assessment surveys of 2002, 12, and 18, 19, and looked at the farmers' income. They basically follow the agriculture growth. So if farmers' income is growing at 3.4, 3.5, 3.6%, that's roughly the rate of growth in agriculture. So you need to accelerate the rate of growth in agriculture. And that will not be accelerated by producing more of wheat and rice, okay? And not even many of these MSP crops. The fastest growing sectors, as you said in the beginning, is the poultry, is the livestock fishery and milk and meat and horticulture. This is the direction in which, because when the incomes increase in the economy, the demand for livestock products and horticulture products increases. So a demand-led agriculture growth has a potential to grow at 4.5%, 5% easily. In fact, in certain states like Gujarat, during Prime Minister Modi's time when he was the chief minister, agriculture grew at 9.2% per annum, unheard of. It was higher than even the Green Revolution days of Punjab. And they did not rely on MSP at all. There is no MSP business and procurement in Gujarat, and they know where the business is. So they grow spices and banana and cotton, BT cotton at the time was a big. So the more diversified crop and more high value crop has the potential to give you double or triple of what you're getting today.
Let me ask you this, and let's take Punjab farmers as an example because they're in the news today. You're suggesting that they should diversify from wheat and rice to what are high value agriculture crops such as fruit, vegetables, livestock, fisheries. Do we need to incentivize them to do this so that the initial risk as they switch from wheat and rice to these high value agricultural crops, that initial risk is minimized? Should we incentivize them?
Of course. That is what I would say a good investment package. And the center and the state should join hands, not oppose each other. Okay. If they can join hands, I would give you one little example. Amritsar, you declare that as a district for only exports, largely for exports, and create a new vibrant agriculture there, fruits, vegetables, spices, and basmati, let the basmati continue, and export it to the Gulf countries, because Gulf countries cannot produce anything. Their soil doesn't suit, very expensive, they don't have water. We are lucky that Punjab has 99% irrigation. It is blessed by nature, all the water that they have, but they are using for very low value crops, common rice for PDS. My heavens, let that be produced by Bihar, where the nature is giving some water, or other states. Punjab should have moved 20 years back, 25 years back for very high value agriculture and export market right across the Gulf. And
does this also mean, Professor Gulati, that if you're going to focus on Punjab, to take that example further, exporting to the Gulf, you can't keep imposing export controls?
Not at all.
You have a regime whereby when you create an export market, you protect and nurture it. You don't lose it by putting export controls suddenly.
That's the most foolish thing we can do. Abrupt export bans is totally irrational and anti-farmer. Let me say that very clearly. In fact, if you will have to do a new package for Punjab, then in the initial stages, you may have to subsidize exports. And that is the air freight, because in between Pakistan will not allow you to go through the trucks. So you may have to airlift. And if airlifting, but you can devise a package where some freight subsidy is given, and Gulf is our market, and they're getting all the things from Europe. We can supply them much cheaper.
Will all of this then improve India's productivity? I gather at the moment, our productivity is roughly 30% below global levels and an astonishing 50% below China's. Will the steps you're identifying improve our productivity levels closer to global levels, if not closer to China?
Of course, of course. When you improve and you move from a low value crop to a high value crop, as I said, in case of China, they have a lesser area, but they are producing more than double of our value. So similar thing, you have to leave at least common rice in Punjab. The government should not be procuring from there. Basmati, let them export. Basmati doesn't have an MSP, right? Because you are doing water guzzling, then putting a lot of methane into the system, then a lot of nitrous oxide into the system. The greenhouse gases emission in Punjab agriculture is 5 tons per hectare. It's an environmental disaster. They must switch out of this and to a very high value, what I talked about, horticulture or livestock products, and capture this Gulf market. And for that, there has to be a package, 50-50 package by the Punjab government as well as the central government.
In
That
other
will be
words,
the biggest service to the peasants of Punjab.
in other words, you're saying the cost of incentivization should be borne equally by the state government, Punjab in this case, and central government.
Sure. I think it's a federal structure and we have to work together, not fight each other.
Let me at this point, because I think it's an interesting side issue, point out what the government often does with MSP. When prices rise above the MSP level, it releases wheat and rice from its own stocks, thus forcing the prices down. Doesn't this mean that what the government ends up doing is denying farmers the benefit of higher prices and perversely converting a minimum support price into a maximum support price?
Let me start by saying that I have great sympathy for the policymakers, okay, because they are walking on a very tight rope. If the prices go up by 15%, you and me or urban areas particularly, they start shouting, "Mar diya, mar diya," inflation, okay? And if they suppress, then it becomes anti-farmer because you have not allowed the farmer to get the price that they could have got. For example, last season, just before the harvest, price of wheat in the market was about 2,800 rupees per quintal. And at that price, the government could not have done the procurement from Punjab. So what did they do? Between 15th of January to end of March, they unloaded almost 3.5 million tons of wheat at a price way below their economic cost. So suppressing the market prices and bringing it down to the MSP. So the minimum support price became actually the maximum support price. We calculated the wheat farmers of India lost 40,000 crores by this policy of suppressing domestic prices. Now the issue is you have to calibrate the interests of the consumers and the farmers. The idea of minimum support price in 1965 when it was devised was that this should be the minimum price. If the market is giving a higher price to the farmer, then the government should compete in the market and buy at that price. But that has not happened. We have put the market down to the minimum support price. I think that's a flaw and it is an anti-farmer policy. That is what I would liberate the markets and you protect the most vulnerable consumer side. So the two policies have to be rationalized.
This leads directly, Professor Gulati, to something that you often speak about. You say this government or all governments, not
All
this
government,
tend to have what you call a pro-consumer bias. In other words, in calibrating between the interests of urban, non-agricultural consumers and farmers, the government ends up protecting consumers from inflation more than it protects farmers and helps increase their incomes. You say we need a level playing field between consumer protection from the basis of inflation and farmer protection to improve their income. A better playing field, a level playing field.
Yes, give me 2 minutes to explain this because an ordinary person does not understand what these complexities are. You look at the budget of the center, 47 lakh crores, roughly this budget that we have made, interim budget. Out of that, 2,12,000 crores revised estimate is of food subsidy, which is free food. And the Prime Minister has promised, oh, I'll give free food to 800 million people for the next 5 years. Okay. This is the biggest item, purely for consumers, 800 million consumers. Are they not capable of earning their own food? When you are saying the poverty in the country is only 11%, why are you giving to 60% free food? Question mark. Second biggest item is 1,88,000 crores fertilizer subsidy. Now, we have to understand this fertilizer subsidy a little bit. When you give fertilizer subsidy, the cost of the farmer is low, right? Urea in India is the cheapest in the world, $70 versus production cost of $350, $400. So there is massive diversion to non-agriculture uses even across borders. About 20-25% of urea is leaking away. What is being used by the farmer also is very imbalanced, so you don't get the full bang for the buck. But this, by keeping the cost of production low, the MSP that is being fixed, because there are three major crops that use most of this fertilizer: rice, wheat, and sugarcane. So you are keeping the MSP low, ultimately benefiting the consumers. So this is a pass on. Much of the fertilizer subsidy is also a pass on to the consumers by keeping the prices low. So this policy, perhaps when it was devised in 70s, was right because poverty was 70%, 60%. And at that time, you wanted to keep the input prices low and the output prices low because of the large poverty. But now when you are saying poverty is only 11%, we need to revisit these policies. Then there are certain PM Kisan or insurance subsidy and credit subsidy. The total is about 5 lakh crores of subsidy in the agri-food space. Out of that, 80%, that is food and fertilizer subsidy, which are going primarily for the consumer, is a clear bias towards the consumers, 80%. Okay? This has been going on for all these years. Okay? So what I'm saying is level playing field. In fact, now is the time when 75% of this money of 5 lakh crores subsidy only needs to be reoriented and realigned in favor of the farmers to give them higher productivity. And this package that we just talked about of high value agriculture. Okay? I can sit down and rationalize the entire subsidy structure. It is feasible. You can give a very better deal to the Punjab farmers to increase their incomes, and within this budget of 5 lakh crores. But politically, it has to be communicated by the political masters, and they need to sit down and look at what the rationalization of food subsidy, fertilizer subsidy is urgent on the table.
You're saying two very important things. You're saying, first of all, creating a more level playing field between farmers' interests and consumers' interests will not cost more than the 5 lakh crore we're already spending. It can be done within that by rationalizing the way the money is spent. And the second important thing you're saying is that if poverty is only 11%, think very carefully about giving free food to 80 crore. People who can afford to pay for their food should pay for their food.
I would say even if you go halfway, I had the privilege of working with Vajpayee Saab in his Economic Advisory Council. I was very young at that time, young dog. And what he did was that the Antodaya, the most vulnerable, will get free food. Okay, so let us say 11% poverty, they are Antodaya. Okay, so let them get free food. But then the others, which at that time was BPL, had to pay 50% of the MSP price for their food, the consumers. And then the APL had to pay 90% of the MSP price. if you do this formula, Vajpayee formula implemented in Modi government, you will save minimum 60-70,000 crores of food subsidy. 60-70,000 crores of subsidy that you put in the price stabilization fund or give a new package to the Punjab farmers for high value to be airlifted to Gulf countries and all that. And
So the
same
money-
thing, you can save 30-40,000 crores from rationalizing fertilizer subsidy.
In other words, we know how to do it. What we
Yes.
don't necessarily have is the political will to do it.
I think they haven't thought it through. They need a good advice at the policy making level, and they need to sit down and communicate to the farmers, because our great opposition will oppose anything that the present government will do. So you need to build that trust with the farmers directly. And I think nobody else can build a better communicator today than the Prime Minister himself. Let him go to the Golden Temple and embrace the farmers and sit down with them that I am for you. All my life is for your betterment. And this is the package that we will have to do. And then you communicate to the others to rationalize these subsidies.
We've
I
come
think
right
within this 5 lakh crores, you can achieve the objective.
We've come right to the end of this interview, and in that last answer, you've touched on the issue I want to raise as my last question. The need to build trust between the government and farmers. Since the last farmer agitation, although it may go back even further than that, there has been a trust deficit between farmers and government. You're someone who's devoted his entire career to agriculture, 40 years altogether, and not just in India, but in several other countries as well. What is your advice, both to the government and to farmers, to build this trust? Because if there isn't trust, none of the policies will be accepted, they will not be implemented, they will not be even considered. What then is your advice to both farmers and governments about building that critical trust?
My feeling and the way I have actually only last week I came back from Africa. I was working with 14 countries of Africa, a mutual exchange we can do between India and Africa. And because their farmers are even behind us and they are still struggling for green revolution. So first thing that you need is a compassion and commitment. That I have put my whole life just for one cause. And to me, the farmers in India or South Asia or Africa, to me, it is humanity at large, which is lagging behind. And we need to work with compassion and commitment. Results will not come overnight. Milk revolution did not come overnight. It was 10 years of struggle, but it was commitment of Korean. Why can't we have 10 more Koreans in the country? And then the money comes in. So if you are honest, if you are committed, and if you have compassion for your people, you will find the way.
And this is your advice to both governments and to farmers?
Of course.
Professor
Government has to take a lead. Government has to take a lead.
The government has to take the lead. Professor Gulati, I thank you for this interview, for explaining in simple, straightforward terms the whole issue of minimum support price, the implications of making it legally binding, the ramifications of calculating in terms of C2 and 50%. You've explained all of this in simple ways so that ordinary people who want to know and understand can actually do so. Thank you very much indeed. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.